On today's World Insight, climate action efforts, a hot topic at the World Economic Forum. How is China carrying out commitments to its 2030 and 2060 carbon targets? How well are global green energy initiatives working?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Chinese Special Envoy for Climate Change Xie Zhenhua spoke on Tuesday at the World Economic Forum, talking about tackling climate change. He hailed China's climate action efforts, saying the Paris Agreement is the future direction and China is in the thick of climate governance. As the largest developing country in the world, China has delivered on its climate targets ahead of schedule. China is in regular talks with global powerhouses, including the US and the European Union, to drum up cooperation. The country does aim to peak carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So how are the global climate action efforts coming along? For more insights, let's loop in our panelists. For the latest discussion on climate change, I'm joined by, in New York, Salim Ali, Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and Environment at the University of Delaware, and also the author of the book, Earthly Order, How Nature Law Define Human Life. In Beijing, Ma Jun, Director of the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs, founder of the Blue Map app. In Beijing also, Zhang Jianyu, Executive Director of BRI Green Development Institute. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you. Good news from the World Economic Forum and Mr. Zhang about a possibility to establish a joint group between China and the United States on climate change issue. Your thoughts?
Well, actually, the establishment of this group was first revealed and confirmed in Glasgow when the two countries met with each other and helped iron out, I think, the most significant contribution to that the Glasgow Pact, which is that a working group on climate change will be established. And I think we're very happy to see a reconfirmation of the execution of this working group again here in Davos.
US-China interaction, Professor Ali, of course, very important in pushing forward the agenda. Now, especially under the current geopolitical environment, how much do you see in the possibility of this group?
Well, this is a very positive sign that despite a lot of other tensions, environmental issues are being used as a mechanism for building trust. And there is a clear pragmatism around this, a realization that solving global problems will require China and the US, two of the world's largest economic powers, as well as two of the world's largest emitters, to collaborate. So what I see at Davos is a continuation of the Glasgow Agreement, but taking it to the point where now they are reporting back on progress that's been made. So behind the scenes, there has been a lot of activity on trying to specially connect China's technological development as well as its investment in developing countries and providing these dividends.
World Economic Forum, Mr. Mao, is very keen to build bridges on the climate change issue. How well do you see so far nations and representatives from different interest groups and parties are using that platform now?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important for us to meet and to meet in person, to review what's going on the climate side. We all know that the UN IPCC framework have issued report that has been called a red alert to the mankind. Climate change is a increasingly pressing challenge, and it's happening. And we are going to face a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise probably over the next a few years. There's a possibility for a single year, temperature rise to that level. And in the meantime, we are very, very excited to see that from Paris to Glasgow, so many countries have gathered together and made solemn commitment. 130 made commitment to carbon neutrality. But in the meantime, pressing challenges, the looming energy crisis, the still ongoing pandemic, and the war in Europe have caused so much tension geopolitically, and making major economies working to build massive redundancies and to release fossil fuel capacity to try to ensure that they can ensure security of energy supply, food supply, and supply chain, industrial supply chain. So this has led to a significant rebound of carbon emission in 2021. So that's the backdrop. Yeah.
Right. The backdrop is extremely challenging. And therefore, the question really is, Professor Ali, the short term and the long term, how do they work together? Short term pragmatic issues. People need energy. They need gas. They need oil. They need to pump the gas into their cars. So, short term ones, vis-a-vis long term ones, are they together or are they very separate?
Well, with climate change, there are two issues. There's mitigation, which is reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases, and there's adaptation, which is to try and figure out what infrastructure we need with a changing climate. Increasingly, there is a realization that we will not be able to meet the targets whereby we'll have a complete reversal of the impacts. And so we will have to adapt. And so I think the US-China partnership is important, not just for mitigation, but for adaptation. China has tremendous expertise in building infrastructure, large infrastructure projects like dams and also bridges and impoundments. So as countries, especially which are in coastal regions, have to adapt to sea level rise, cooperation between the US and China on adaptation is going to be also very important.
Well, that's US and China, but what about globally speaking?
Well, the short-term issue is that we know now for baseload power generation, we will need fossil fuels for the foreseeable next 10 to 15 years at least, because for electricity generation, you need baseload power, and then you have additional power for peak and trough changes that happen. So when we're talking about baseload power, fossil fuels or nuclear are our main option, unless we develop large battery storage infrastructure. And we need a lot of critical metals to develop that battery infrastructure. So that's the long-term trajectory, is we want to develop battery infrastructure for renewable energy. But in the meantime, for the next 15 to 20 years, we will need to have fossil fuels or nuclear. And on nuclear, of course, there is disagreement between countries on how far we should go with nuclear.
Right. The devils are really in the details. That is exactly what we need to discuss. Mr. Zhang, there are so many differences of ideas as to how to go for the next step, short term. And what does it mean for the longer term? Now, your thoughts.
Well, I actually think that, I always try to spin things in the positive direction. I actually think the most recent phenomena, all these interventions can be seen as litmus tests to people's commitment on whether they are really committed to the long term. And I think also gives people additional hope for what's going to happen. Just look at the three sort of major geographies. Okay, China, from the report we saw in the first quarter, the EV penetration has already reached to 20%, which was originally expected not only to 2030, and also there's about 1,000 gigawatts of solar and wind are already under construction, which will help China well excel what China has committed to the 1,200 gigawatts installation by 2030. In Europe, under this whole scheme of energy independence, the acceleration of renewables and also energy efficiency we saw. In the United States, President Biden recently said that, certainly he's being ridiculous, but he said that he sees the higher energy price could be a better thing, a good thing, for people to, for the full realization of the renewables. But I think we'll go back to what Ali just said. I think not only we need to worry about the long term, which I'm very positive, actually, given all these new challenges, but the short term of this issue of IPCC report recently told us we are very likely going to overshoot the 1.5 degree, not to mention about the 2 degree in the next 5 to 10 years. And how we really be able to do that and to solve the crisis for the least developed countries, for the small island countries. I think that's really the thing in front of us.
In fact, it's not just the developing countries and emerging economies, but also the developed ones. In Europe, there are several examples. Germany, for example, how fast we'll be able to switch to renewables. At this point, we know that coal power plants are going back to work in some of the countries in order to deal with the crisis. Now, Mr. Ma, that is the question, isn't it? According to IEA, International Energy Agency Director, one of the ideas is quickly switch to renewables at quite some cost, while at the same time working intensely on nuclear. Now, that is just one of those ideas flowing around right now. What do you see is the practical solution, short term, long term?
Yeah, short term wise, I think we are in a really looming global energy crisis. Especially with the war, that make it so much more complicated. So even some of the European countries will have to switch to fossil fuel, even to coal. But in Europe, there is still some possibility for it to switch to transform its energy supply, hasten the process. There's more possibility, but to other countries, including the United States, but more prominently China and India, how to, as Ali put it, how to provide the base load. There's no other resources other than coal, to achieve that. So that's the harsh reality. That's kind of that's why, in China, there's talk about that, we have to build the new mechanism before we scrap the old one. We cannot strike, with one strike to accomplish the goal, and we have to, coordinate the whole country. But now there's a real challenge on the technology side. If we want to have a hasten the transformation, like how to, transform our coal power plants,
right,
to make it more flexible, how to build smart power grid, how to, build energy storage. All these are still much in the air. So I think China and US, the importance for the two countries to meet in face to face and to agree to build this working group for the whole 2020s is because we both have massive innovative power. So we need to really put our focus on that instead of trying to, to feel kind of complacent with all these targets.
Refuse to look at is the reality that there is the geopolitical tension. And that's why the China-US group is so significant to a certain extent. But the question really is, Professor Ali, under the current geopolitical environment, how much real cooperation at the depths that we need could happen?
There is potential if we can have good rules of engagement. One of the reasons for the trust deficit between the US and China has been around science and technology and intellectual property, around patents and so on. I think there is good progress now in terms of trying to have better rules of engagement in terms of research. So for example, I'm at a research university. We've had a record of students from China in the past who've done amazing work and have gone back and also had technology transfer through that process of research engagement. I think that is now again beginning to get re-engaged. That'll be an important avenue whereby if we focus on green energy technologies and research between the US and China through educational partnerships and collaboration. However, we will always need to be conscious of some of these other geopolitical factors making an impact. The G20 can be a mechanism through which some of these kinds of partnerships can be cemented. So it has more potential for raising environmental issues to high politics. So I think that could be an important avenue forward.
Mr. Zhang, same question.
Well, I think it's all in our value proposition, right? I think President Biden has recognized climate change as an existential threat in his inaugural speeches. And certainly we have seen Europeans, champion on the climate as one of their most important policy agendas. I think what I will call for is, and in China, President Xi has the two Peking and not building coal-fired power plants overseas. We really need to. It's a really testing moment to see whether we want to just talk the talk or walk the walk. And if we all agree climate change is such a big threat that we really need to put hold of our differences and try to work together in the short term. As I said, 5 to 10 years. I mean, the island countries will be gone. If all the countries don't work with each other, they will be gone forever. They will never come back. Long term, I mean, there's going to be the issues of the productivity, the supply chain. U.S. is already shortage of the solar panels. You saw the CNN report, and other countries have that. And I think those kind of going back to the old days, that you have sort of just a monopoly of the issue by yourself. That time is gone. If we all, again, I want to emphasize, if we all agree this is an existential threat, we need to work together. Let's put our differences aside.
Well, you're always very idealistic, but I want to congratulate you on your courage to repeat the very important messages. Mr. Ma, there is the issue of cost. There's also the issue of funding. Now, about the cost, one of the things that we were looking at is the so-called worries about the international global supply chains. For example, people are talking about even if switching to renewables, we have to have different kinds of versions of global supply chains so that it will be more reliable. People do not want to see what we are seeing today with the Russian-Ukraine crisis and its impact on the global energy issue. Now, Mr. Ma, on that alone, it's already mind-boggling. China, for example, is producing one of the most important producers of some of the green materials in the world. Meanwhile, there are other countries that are major suppliers of some of the basic materials used, for example, for batteries and others, of the green technologies. So if we talk about diversify under the current globalization of supply chains, we are talking about much higher cost possibly for years to come.
Naturally, there is a kind of a redistribution of labor, to put it that way, globally. We have seen that happening, but that should happen, in a way that everyone play its own competitiveness, rather than just going, only for the geopolitical reason. That's the concern. So on our green transformation, the race to net zero, there are all these supply chains that raise big concern. The supply, global supply of those metals, critically important to all these batteries and energy storage and new vehicles, and this they are not sufficient to support to the current technology. So we need we need to, prevent all this monopoly of resources and ultra competition over that. And on the nuclear side, all this could have security concerns, the security over energy supply. So how do we, build up trust on these issues? Otherwise, everyone have to build a massive redundancies so that they can keep up, or they can ensure their security. I think that for the central government, all this state-wise, every country have to have the rights, to concern about that, to try to strive for that. But globally, I think the much better way, much more effective ways for us all together, to build trust and to avoid that.
Is it possible, Professor Ali?
Yes, I think it is absolutely possible. There are now organizations such as the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, which is based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. They have recently published a report, for example, on rare earth elements and the green energy transition. Of course, China is one of the world's leading producers of rare earth elements, which are used in magnets for wind turbines. If you have an international organization like IRENA, which is able to coordinate the supply chains needed for such critical metals, I think we could have a win-win opportunity.
On the other hand, the funding issue, we see a lot of governments and administrations have been talking about the importance of making moves on climate change, and yet the funding has been a big problem, the so-called walk the talk part. Now, Mr. Zhang, how much is that changing under the current circumstances?
Well, we all know the developed nations failed on their commitment of $100 billion committed under the Paris Agreement. And people have been trying to come up all the creative accountings, try to shy away from their historical responsibilities. But we do see some encouraging signs, particularly along the line of green financing or climate finance. Depends on which way you look at it. Ali mentioned about the G20. There's a working group on the G finance, which is led by China's central bank, and also there's green investment principle, and also we see all these different pledges, different stakeholders put together, including private enterprises trying to speed up. So I think there's two things. One is that nobody is disputing this is the way it goes, and I think the government, particularly the big nations, had the responsibility to really help set up the goals, particularly in those investment taxonomies, and align with them so that money from all different corners of the society can be redirected into the area of climate and green. Only rely on and depend on the money from the sovereign nations will no longer be able to match up with the requirement.
Mr. Ma, about the issue of funding.
Yeah, it's a matter of climate justice that we ensure that the major industrialized countries fulfill their commitment of $100 billion per year, and that still hasn't been done. I think that's a great shame, I have to say. But in the meantime, in today's situation, we need other stakeholders to join the efforts. I think through all these years, we have seen a positive sign for increasingly, the brands operating, sourcing from China. We're working together, with local stakeholders to try to green the supply chain, and in the process, everyone share some of the cost in this green transformation. Only the last week, so we have seen every week about 100 suppliers being motivated by the major brands, multinational brands, to try to measure and report their carbon footprint. We have developed a digital platform that can more cost effectively help them to measure and report. I think all these technologies, new kind of IT technologies, could also be something that through the South to South cooperation to help the developing world to achieve, to hasten the transformation.
Urgent tasks that were raised by the discussions about climate change and the apparent even more urgent challenges we're having today, the pandemic, the geopolitical conflicts, and also the economic crisis that we see due to many factors. So do you see there is already a realigning of the priorities that we see today? Professor Ali.
Yes, inevitably there's going to be a prioritization of resources. So for example, with the pandemic as well as the Ukraine war, a lot of the donor funds are being channeled now towards dealing with those crises rather than the Green Climate Fund. So the $100 billion for the Green Climate Fund, only $10 billion has actually been put into the bank. So only 10%. And that's because you have all these other factors that are coming up. However, I think if we have a systems approach to looking at these problems and seeing the connections between climate change and zoonotic diseases and pandemics, and also resource security issues, which can lead also to resource nationalism and conflict, then I think we would have the potential to see a much more engagement on climate change as well. So I think we need to make those connections to make the case to the global powers around climate change as not being just a side issue, but being interwoven into these global challenges.
I think we are coming to the end of our discussion. Thank you so much for all your insights and also your input. Ma Jun, Ali, and Jianyu, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. That's a discussion on climate change. With that, we're coming to the end of today's program. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of my team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now.